Mass killers don't get peace in prison, and for Bryan Kohberger, the nightmare is just beginning. Will he survive or be crushed by the system? In the last video, we looked in detail at what Bryan Kohberger's prison life would be like. And at that time, I said that for him, prison would be worse than death. If you haven't seen that video yet, make sure to check it out, because today's question takes things even further. Will Bryan Kohberger actually survive behind bars? When someone is sentenced to life in prison, most people think the story ends there. But the truth is, that's where the real story begins, in a place where every day is a fight to stay alive. For Bryan, prison isn't just a cage, it's a battlefield. The rules are different and the people even more dangerous. When he accepted multiple life sentences, he didn't just lose his freedom. He stepped into a world where survival itself becomes a gamble. In this video, we'll break down exactly why surviving prison will be a brutal challenge for Bryan Kohberger. From the intake process to cellmates, gang threats, mental breakdowns, and what his future might really look like, we'll cover it all. And by the end, you'll have to decide for yourself. Can he truly survive? Or will he become just another tragic story behind bars? When Bryan Kohberger was sent to prison, his journey didn't start directly with the general population. For every inmate, the very first step is the intake process, a procedure that may look like just paperwork and medical tests, but in reality, it decides what the next years of his prison life will look like. During the intake days, the inmate is kept separate, evaluated, medical checkups, psychological assessment, and risk classification. The exact same will happen in Bryan's case, but this isolation is temporary, lasting a maximum of 30 to 90 days. Up to this point, everything seems calm, but that calm is just the silence before the storm. Because when the door to the general population opens, Bryan steps into a world where rules don't matter, only survival does. The part of prison where he'll spend his life among other inmates. This is the point where the real test of survival begins. Because in intake, there was a system, a structure. But in the general population, even within the system, a separate universe operates. Rules belong to the inmates and punishments are also decided by the inmates. For a high-profile killer like Bryan, this transition is even more dangerous. In intake, he has a protective shield, but in the general population, that shield is removed. At that time, the people sharing his cell, walking in the yard, and eating in the chow hall are the same ones who are either disturbed by his past or alert because of his unpredictability. And this is the place where it will be decided whether Bryan will be just another inmate in prison or a target. The very first rule of surviving inside prison is simple. You have to understand how other inmates see you. Your reputation decides your safety and your danger. And for Bryan Kohberger, reputation is a double-edged sword. He is a convicted mass murderer, but his crime wasn't for any gang rivalry, drug deal, or self-defense. He killed 4 college students for his own thrill, an unpredictable and disturbing act that sets him apart in prison. In prison, inmates judge their cellmate by one thing: predictability. If an inmate's crime is understandable, like a revenge shooting or a robbery gone wrong, other inmates can handle them. But Bryan is unpredictable. His mindset is hard to understand, and that makes him a dangerous roommate. Imagine having to sleep at night in a small cell with him. Can you comfortably close your eyes? Other inmates won't want to live with him for the same reason. For them, safety means being able to trust their cellmate at least a little, even if he is a criminal. That's the reason why cellmate relationships can become a nightmare for Bryan. Most of the killers already in prison have some logic behind their crimes: drugs, money, revenge. Bryan's crime had no logic, and people like that always become a source of paranoia. Other inmates will think, if he killed those 4 students for no reason, what's stopping him from attacking me tomorrow for no reason? Because of this paranoia, Bryan will either face constant rejection when it comes to assigning him a cellmate, or the inmates living with him will turn violent just to eliminate the threat he represents. And if you look closely at prison life, you'll understand that the cell is the only place where an inmate finds a little peace. If Bryan can't even provide peace there, then his chances of survival will drop even further. Other inmates will see him as a ticking time bomb, and no one wants to be locked in a cell with a ticking bomb. There's a harsh reality inside prison. If you're not with the gangs, you're against them. In Idaho prisons, the most powerful and feared gang is the Aryan Knights, a white supremacist group known for their brutal rules and control. And for a high-profile inmate like Bryan Kohberger, an encounter with the Aryan Knights is almost guaranteed. The Aryan Knights' approach is simple. If someone can be useful, pull them into the fold. In their eyes, Bryan is a potential asset because he's already proven he isn't afraid of killing. In prison, this quality, no matter how disturbing, becomes a badge of honor for gangs. For them, it doesn't matter who Bryan killed, what matters is what he did. And he brutally ended the lives of 4 people. That becomes an invisible credential the Aryan Knights won't ignore. But here comes the twist. Bryan will have only 2 paths. If he joins the gang, his life will become even more violent. Gangs use new members for their dirty work, intimidation, assaults, and sometimes killings. Bryan's tall, intimidating presence and his unpredictability could make him a perfect weapon for them. But that also means his life will constantly be at risk, because he'll be pushed into violent situations over and over. And if Bryan rejects the Aryan Knights' offer, then things become even more dangerous for him. Going against a gang in prison is like making yourself an open target. His refusal could be taken as disrespect, and disrespect is often answered with blood. That's why, whether Bryan wants it or not, the Aryan Knights will inevitably become part of his survival equation. So the question is, will Bryan buy his safety by becoming part of the gang, or will he make his own survival even harder by staying away from them? In both situations, one thing is clear: avoiding gangs is nearly impossible, and Bryan's encounter with the Aryan Knights is going to be the most critical turning point of his prison journey. Who is the most dangerous inmate inside prison? Not the biggest, not the strongest, not the gang leader. The most dangerous is the person who has nothing left to lose, and Bryan Kohberger fits exactly into that category. He has already received multiple life sentences, there's no chance of appeal, and there's no possibility of freedom even in the distant future. It means he is going to spend his entire life behind bars. When a person has no future, he can go to any extent. Most inmates, no matter how violent, operate within a limit, because they know that if they do something extreme, their release date will disappear or their parole will be canceled. But in Bryan's case, this pressure doesn't exist at all. He's already done what he had to do, and now every day of his life will be spent in the same place. This mindset can make him even more unpredictable and deadly. Imagine if there's a confrontation in the yard. Other inmates might think, if I do something, I'll get punished. But Bryan has no such brake system in his mind. For him, a new violent act would just be another part of the day. This is what turns him into a ticking time bomb. And in prison, ticking time bombs either become weapons for gangs or get crushed under the weight of their own madness. The biggest risk in this situation is that Bryan himself might initiate violent incidents. And if that happens, the prison system will have only one response: extreme isolation. Locked alone day and night in a small cell, where his life will slowly waste away. But to reach that point, he first has to become a serious threat to himself and others. And the real question is, how quickly will he move in that direction? Life in prison isn't just about bars and locked cells. It's a non-stop survival game where every small thing decides your safety. For Bryan Kohberger, daily life will be a battlefield. Every day will bring a new challenge for him. Whether it's getting food in the chow hall, walking in the yard, or sharing space with a cellmate. The first struggle is food. Eating in the chow hall sounds simple, but that's where the most confrontations happen. Accidentally touching someone's tray, cutting in line, or sitting at the wrong table. Even these small things can trigger fights. For a high-profile inmate like Bryan, this is even riskier because people will want to provoke him to build their own reputation. In prison, respect is the highest currency, and anyone can make a name for themselves by punching Bryan or publicly embarrassing him. The second challenge is the yard. The yard is where inmates spend their time, walking, working out, or hanging out in groups. But it's also in the corners of the yard where the most dangerous dealings happen, gang meetings and violent paybacks. For Bryan, moving around in the yard will be a high-risk activity. His height and his case already make him stand out, and standing out in prison is never safe. The third challenge is trust and alliances. Staying alone in prison is difficult, but the wrong friendship can be even more dangerous. Bryan will have to decide who to associate with, align with a gang, or stay completely solo. Both options are risky, Being solo means vulnerability, and joining a gang means constant violence. And finally, the biggest challenge is mental strain. Being confined day and night, facing constant threats, and staying alert at all times can mentally break a person. For Bryan, survival won't just be physical, it will be psychological too. If his mind collapses, his prison life will become even shorter and more miserable. In short, every day will be a new test for Bryan. A single wrong move can put his life in danger. In prison, survival means staying calculated every second. And with Bryan's unpredictable nature, the question is, how long will he be able to maintain his control? If we look at the bigger picture of Bryan Kohberger's prison journey, 3 possible outcomes appear the clearest. The first scenario is that he becomes part of a gang, especially the Aryan Knights. This could give him short-term protection, but it would also mean his life gets trapped in constant violence and gang politics. One wrong move and he could become a target of his own brothers. The second scenario is complete isolation. If Bryan gets involved in any violent incident, or if he is considered an unpredictable threat, prison authorities will send him into extreme solitary confinement. Day and night in a small cell with only a bunk and a steel toilet, zero human contact. Technically, this would be for his safety, but in reality, it would become a slow psychological death. The third and most risky scenario is survival in the general population without strong backing. This means constant vigilance every day, every interaction a potential threat, and every small mistake could trigger a fight. For Bryan, this would be the most stressful path, where he enjoys neither the protection of gangs nor the shield of isolation. This is the exact situation that makes his survival the most questionable. And that's why, when we ask the question, will Bryan Kohberger be able to survive in prison? The answer isn't simple. His unpredictability, the nature of his crimes, and his life sentences place him in a completely different position. He has nothing left to lose, which makes him even more dangerous. But for the same reason, he becomes a red flag for the inmates around him. So in the end, the choice is yours. What do you think? Will Bryan be able to spend his entire life behind bars? Or will he get crushed under his own choices and the brutal prison system? Share your opinion in the comments. And if you haven't seen my earlier video, Bryan Kohberger's life in prison worse than death, make sure to watch it. In that, I explained in detail what his daily routine would be like. This video is a natural continuation of that one. And for more powerful true crime content like this, subscribe to Crime Shade, where we give you insights you won't find anywhere else.